Discussion of Brexit at the European Union summit. Last night, the Brexit secretary whizzed in and out of Brussels. Dominic Raab's message to the EU 27, we don't have enough to sell this back home. Theresa May told the Commons what was still missing from the outline deal was an EU promise that the whole of the UK could stay in a customs union-style arrangement, so Northern Ireland wasn't carved out on its own.
Two problems remain. First, the EU says...
Boris was one of them, an MP shouted.
First, the EU says there is not time to work out the detail of this UK-wide solution in the next few weeks. So even with the progress we have made, the EU still requires a backstop to the backstop, effectively an insurance policy for the insurance policy. And they want this to be the Northern Ireland-only solution that they had previously proposed.
Before Mrs May got to her feet, Steve Baker, former Brexit minister who coordinates potential rebels, sent Tory MPs a message on WhatsApp. This is almost certainly theatre. Terrible threats will be made. And then, at this European Council, breakthrough. It wasn't designed to make the lengthy question session any easier. Pro-Brexit MPs demanded to know when the temporary UK-wide customs arrangement would end.
So far today, my right honourable friend has failed to reassure the House that we will definitely be able to leave the backstop by the 31st of December 2020.
December 2021. If that isn't the deadline, then could you say what it is?
We set that point of the expectation that that would be completed by December 2021. One of the issues, as I indicated in my statement, that we're discussing with the European Union is how we can ensure that we do reflect the temporary nature of the backstop.
Yesterday, the Chief Whip tweeted an image to show he hadn't had much weekend rest. But some think delaying the critical vote on any deal as close to the crash-out date as possible could help him win some MPs over from both sides of the Commons. It could be that this whole thing is now pushed down to the December summit, a vote in Parliament potentially in January. How do you think that alters the metrics of the way the vote goes?
The short answer is, I suppose, there would be some expectation that would increase the pressure on those of us who are unhappy not to rebel. But I think we should be absolutely crystal clear that the objections we have are so fundamental that it's not as though we're going to blink in the face of this just because the pressure on the timing has been ratcheted up.
I can see how the EU 27 and the government might want to run it to January. And the truth is...
To maximise the pressure?
Well, to maximise the pressure, exactly. But also...
On MPs on your side as well as on their own?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, look, there's a lot of staging going on here. We all know that.
The Democratic Unionists might have propped up the government in the year since the election, but their Westminster leader's face as Theresa May tried to reassure him was not very reassuring for her. Wednesday's meeting in Brussels will go ahead, but the man who will chair it, EU Council President Donald Tusk, said tonight the chances of no deal are now more likely than ever before.
Gary Gibbon at Westminster. Well, now, the Brexit secretary made a dash for Brussels yesterday, but was out of his meeting with the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, within an hour. Matt Fry has been there all day. Matt, what's going on?
Well, John, I think there's a distinct kind of lowering of the mood here in Brussels. I was here last week and I spoke to a whole number of senior EU officials who all told me that after the Salzburg summit, which was disastrous, the working environment here was more positive than ever, according to one of these officials, more positive than ever. Well, today you really get the impression that they're kind of throwing their hands up in despair, partly because they feel that they've been misunderstood by London, and mostly because they feel that whatever they agree with civil servants talking to civil servants, when it comes to the political arena, that circle simply cannot be squared by Theresa May because of the Brexiteers in her own party, because crucially, because of the DUP. And I get the impression tonight, really for the first time, with Angela Merkel going on the record saying this is difficult, with Donald Tusk, who's normally one of the great optimists of the city, saying, you know what, we have to prepare for a no-deal Brexit. I really get the impression for the first time that that is indeed the way that they are thinking, that there simply can't be any sort of divine intervention, any deus ex machina that can suddenly turn up and make it all happen. Because whenever they come to an agreement, they come up against the same political blockage because of London. And just very briefly, I saw an EU official, a senior EU official here last week, who was having drinks until very late at night because he thought things were going so well. The same man today was sitting virtually by himself on a rooftop, looking very lonely indeed.
We already know from our interview at the end of last year with Stephen Armstrong that to revert to WTO rules would cost the company about $1 billion in tariffs. Tonight, I've spoken to him again. He's added to that warning by saying that the notion that some kind of Canada deal plus would somehow help the car industry, people would be gravely mistaken if they believe that. Part of Ford's supply chain already connects them with Canada. He says there are significant customs checks and delays, which is fine if you're going across the Atlantic, but if you were to pick up that relationship and transpose it to the UK and Europe, it simply would not work. There would be delays at ports and it would upset the whole system and simply wouldn't fly. For him, as for all the other car bosses we've spoken to, Carlos Tavares, the head of PSA, the boss of Toyota that we've spoken to in recent weeks, frictionless trade is where it's at. And tonight, Stephen said to me, if we don't get frictionless trade, then we will take whatever action is necessary to protect our business in the event of a hard Brexit. Now, what does that mean for their workers in Bridgend and in Dagenham, the plant in Dagenham and in Merseyside? Well, who knows? But Ford has to make decisions for investment in the next couple of years. So certainly tonight, not just Theresa May nervous by this warning, but the workers at Ford will doubtless be very nervous too.
It's rare to see a party as divided as yours was in the House of Commons today. Who was to blame, the ERG, Mrs May, or the Labour Party? Who was to blame?
Well, I think ultimately the EU are to blame because they are attempting to force us to accept a set of conditions which would mean that, in effect, we remained inside the European Union. And for myself and many of my colleagues, that is completely unacceptable because it would breach the spirit of the referendum and the vote to leave that was undertaken by 17.4 million people in this country.
Well, with respect, did you hear many speaking in favour of what Mrs May had to say?
No, I did not. And
well, where does that leave us?
Well, I would argue, and I think what your correspondent said about the lack of support for Chequers in the Commons today only bears me out, really, that there is no way that Chequers will pass the House of Commons. It simply will not happen, particularly because the DUP are so angry at the moment, and somehow Number 10 have managed to upset those people on whom we rely for a majority.
Well, we have been told that a Canada-style deal is one of the things which is on the cards. It's very clear tonight from the car industry that isn't going to wash.
Well, they have some concerns, but I understand that by a use of modern technology and, some of the best custom systems culled from around the world, it would be possible to overcome those concerns. We believe that a Super Canada style deal is something that could unite nearly the whole of the Conservative Party.
So you mean the leaders of the car industry are a little bit thick? They're not working out what a wonderful deal it is?
No, I wouldn't call them thick for one moment. They employ a number of my constituents. I've visited Ford facilities a number of times as a Member of Parliament. But there are certain political realities here, and Chequers simply will never get through the House of Commons, but Super Canada might.
Well, stay with us for a moment because I've got Tony Lloyd here from Labour. Now, Labour seems to be stiffening its resolve to stay in a customs union, or the customs union it became today, and to stay inside the single market. That seems to be staying in the European Union, but not having any say in its rules.
But John, one of the important things for me with the role I've got is a recognition of what the Good Friday Agreement achieved in the island of Ireland, and of course between the island of Ireland and the rest of the UK.
Well, I'll come to Ireland in a moment, but I just want that specific point too. Is Labour now wedded to staying inside the customs union and indeed the single market?
I think what we've been saying consistently is that we need to be in a customs union.
Well, it became a sort of the today.
I think let's go with a customs union. There are legal issues around the customs
Starmer
union.
has used a the.
Yeah. And equally with the single market, we need single market compatibility. But the border in Ireland does matter. It isn't just one of those things, because unfortunately, actually, parts of the Conservative Party have treated it as if it's an expendable issue. It's not. We, Labour governments, but actually in fairness, Conservative governments since, have respected the international treaty that guaranteed peace in Northern Ireland.
Okay,
That matters enormously.
Well, what do you say to some of those Labour MPs who even this weekend have talked of backing Mrs May?
Well, I would urge my colleagues to say, look, we put forward 6 tests, basically to create how do we maintain a jobs-first Brexit. We've seen from the comments, not just of Ford today, but AstraZeneca in a different...
That's a long thing to say to them. What would you say? I mean,
would
you have them out of the party or what?
No, I would actually be saying, look, put the national interest first. But I would actually be saying to Theresa May, because Mark Francois is right on one thing, the problem at the moment is we've got political solutions instead of national leadership. Theresa May could unite Parliament. She would lose some of her own members, I accept that, by coming on the terrain where Labour is and saying, yes, look, there is a voting majority in the House of Commons for a customs union, a single market approach, peace in Northern Ireland, and actually jobs for people across Britain.
Tony Lloyd, thank you very much. And Mark Francois, thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. Well, welcome to Bournemouth, where the pro-Brexit group Leave Means Leave is holding a rally in the conference centre as we speak. Their message to Theresa May, chuck Chequers, go it alone and take the opportunities of a world trade deal, whatever that is. Politicians of all stripes are here, but it was Nigel Farage, that Brexit blast from the past, who went on walkabout earlier. Also amongst the speakers is Sammy Wilson from the DUP, the party whose 10 MPs have the power to potentially torpedo any deal Theresa May makes if they're not happy. Their red line to Theresa May, don't cut a deal which treats us differently to the rest of the UK. Well, earlier I spoke to him and I began by asking whether he would back the whole of the UK remaining in the customs union for a temporary period.
Well, no, we wouldn't, for 2 reasons. First of all, that would not be honouring the commitment which the Prime Minister and the government made when the referendum result came out, namely that we'd be leaving the EU and we'd be free to do our own trade deals. And secondly...
So not for an extended period either, that wouldn't fix it either for you.
And secondly, any temporary arrangement would not be temporary. Once the EU had a commitment that you were in the customs union, what incentive would there be for the European Union to do any deal with the United Kingdom that would free it from that commitment to staying in the customs union?
And you wouldn't back the Northern Ireland on its own, remaining in the customs union or the single market?
Well, that has always been our bottom line as well, that the United Kingdom as a whole voted to leave the EU, and we will not let EU negotiators hold Northern Ireland to ransom as a bargaining chip to try and keep the UK in the European Union against the wishes of the people.
So you're relaxed about no deal?
Well, I'd prefer that there would be a deal. But if there is no deal, then as the 5th largest economy in the world, we trade more outside the EU than we do inside the EU. The EU is as dependent upon us, and some EU countries are very dependent, especially the Irish Republic, are very dependent upon the UK economy. I think if we finish up with a no deal, it wouldn't be too long before the EU licked its wounds, got over its fit of pique, and came back and started to negotiate sensibly with the government.
A no deal, one of the immediate consequences would be a hard border, and Sinn Féin has made absolutely clear that they would push for a reunification of Ireland.
We see, and that's another lie and another con trick which has been foisted on the people of the United Kingdom in all of these debates. Who's going to put up this hard border? The Irish government said they're not going to. The British government says they're not going to do.
But if there's no deal, you can't just have goods flowing from one part of the EU into Northern Ireland.
They flow at present, and they're checked at present.
Because we're all part of the European Union.
Yes, but there are still taxes to be collected between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic because there's different VAT rates, different excise duties. There are different regulations between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, and that doesn't present a problem at the border.
Is it just fanciful to think that you wouldn't have a hard border if there was a no-deal Brexit?
It's fanciful, first of all, to think that anybody could impose a hard border. 50,000 troops with watchtowers, roads that were blown up, checkpoints, army patrols, electronic listening devices couldn't seal the border during the Trouble. Now, I don't know how the EU think that they're then going to magically put a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. I mean, if anybody, think of, first of all, is it necessary? It's not.
Is it possible? It's not. And is there evidence that it can be done without that? It is, because it's being done at present.
Are you prepared to see Jeremy Corbyn in number 10?
Well, I don't think, you see, I think that you're putting to me an option which is not necessary.
But that's the logical consequence of no deal, general election, you bring the government down.
No,
if you're not bluffing, you're obviously prepared to see Jeremy Corbyn in number 10.
It is not the logical conclusion, because of course, if the Prime Minister insists on bringing the kind of deal which appears to be negotiated at present with the EU to the House of Commons, we will vote it down. And she will then have an option. One, does she go and look what caused that vote to be lost and what changes can I make? Or she could go for a vote of confidence. We will not vote against the government on a vote of confidence, and given it's a 5 fixed year term, if the government survived that vote of confidence, then they would either have to look for a new leader or look for a different approach to the problem. But it does not necessarily mean that, first of all, there would be a general election, and secondly, you're making a huge assumption that Jeremy Corbyn would win that general election. But it will, I don't believe it even needs to come to that.
Sammy Wilson, thank you very much.